A cleaning lady who dreamed of becoming a chef was constantly humiliated by the staff of the luxury restaurant, until one day a very important critic arrived for an evaluation. After an accident, the chef had nothing to present to the critic, but she said she could do it. Everyone was in shock when he discovered who had actually prepared that meal. The night at La Rivière began when the city's most discerning clients finished parking their imported cars in front of the glassy, understated facade, where the elegant name was half hidden among ivy and fine wood. Inside, amber lights hung like nearby constellations, casting a reverent glow over perfectly arranged tables. But behind the scenes, in the sweltering, cramped, ever-boiling kitchen, a different kind of show was underway. Catherine was already there. She was always the last to leave and the first to arrive. Her light, gray uniform, stained in ways even boiling water couldn't fix, stood in stark contrast to the chef's pristine white jackets. She moved with quiet steps, almost weightless, as if over the years her body had learned to shape itself around the space so as not to intrude. She cleaned as though listening to a silent symphony. Every pan she organized, every surface she disinfected, was done with eyes carefully watching the cook's movements. She studied how Chef Julien aligned his vegetable cuts with surgical precision, how sauces gained a perfect sheen with just the right touch of butter. But it was Mark, the sous chef, from whom she learned the most, even when he had no idea he was teaching. Or maybe he did, and that's what annoyed him. Mark was young, far too confident for someone who didn't know how to listen. He spoke loudly, like someone desperate to be heard beyond the kitchen. His skin was always slick with oil and sweat, and his gaze never lingered on Catherine for more than 2 seconds, just long enough to register her as part of the furniture. Hey, cleaning lady, do a better job on that floor. What if the critic slips and blames the foie gras? Laughter. No one answered, but the mockery hung in the air like old grease smoke. Catherine said nothing. She never did. She simply lowered her gaze and pressed the rag harder into the tile, as if she could scrub the words away. That night, like so many others, the kitchen began to empty after service ended. The servers returned from the dining room, carrying used silverware, and small tragedies spilled into wine glasses. The cooks slammed stainless steel lids and laughed among themselves, arguing over who would get the least sleep before the next shift. Then the fridge gave a soft chime as it opened. "Hey, what's this?" asked Diego, one of the kitchen assistants, pulling out a plate covered in plastic wrap. The fluorescent light revealed a delicate arrangement, golden herb-crusted fish cakes in a half-moon over a smooth pumpkin puree. At the center, thin slices of caramelized red onion and a sprinkle of fresh cilantro. The aroma carried something beyond technique, a kind of warmth, the memory of a pot left simmering on a forgotten stove. "That's not on the menu," someone said. "Of course not," Mark snorted, stepping closer. "That's gourmet janitor cuisine." More laughter. The others circled like hyenas around easy prey. "Damn, look at this plating. Real fancy. Maybe she wants a shot at Broom Master Chef." "Wait, is this yesterday's fish?" another joked. "That explains the smell, childhood poverty." Catherine heard everything. Just a few feet away, she was kneeling by the industrial stove, scrubbing the grates with vinegar and baking soda. The sweet aroma of the dish lingered in the air, now tinged with humiliation. Maitre d' Roberto hurried past the hallway, avoiding eye contact. He always did. A polished man, incapable of direct cruelty, but perfectly comfortable in silence. Mark lifted the cover like unveiling some cursed relic. "So, who wants a bite of the cleaning princess's delicacy?" Before a single fork could move, Catherine stood. Silently, she walked toward them. They stepped back, surprised. She never spoke. Ever. The damp cleaning rag still hung from her hand. Her deep, quiet eyes moved from face to face, not with anger, but a calm steadiness, like someone who knows she won't be heard, yet chooses to speak anyway. She reached out, took the plate. The fish cakes were still warm. With a single, contained motion, she walked over to the industrial trash bin by the sink. She removed the plastic wrap carefully, paused to glance at her creation, then tipped the entire plate in. The sound of the cakes hitting the black trash bag was flat. Final. She returned to her corner, picked up the rag, kept cleaning. No one said a word. The silence that followed was crueler than the laughter. And inside her, something shattered and solidified at the same time. It was hard to name. Not rage. Not shame. It was like dignity deciding it would no longer ask permission to exist. In the darkness of the pantry, her recipe notebook remained hidden, wrapped in an embroidered cloth her grandmother had given her. She thought of it, thought of her, and took a deep breath, like someone who knows it's not time yet. But the time will come. The kitchen at La Riviere was quieter than usual at the start of that night. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes before storms, the tense sound of knives slowly dragging across cutting boards, of silver spoons stirring sauces that couldn't go a second past perfection. Mouths barely opened. Eyes said everything. Tonight was the night of Arthur Delamar's visit. His name circulated like a spell. Arthur Delamar, demanding, mysterious, ruthless. A man who could make or break careers with barely a sentence. The moment his elegant silhouette crossed into the main dining room, the air seemed to change density. Catherine felt it all, even from a distance. She was in the corner of the kitchen, quietly scrubbing tiles no one else noticed. But her ears were tuned in. The rhythm of the orders, the tone of Chef Julien's voice, the nervous twitch in Roberto's fingers. It was like listening to an orchestra where any instrument could slip off key and collapse the harmony. Julien, always intense, but now borderline volatile, paced hard between stations. His white jacket clung to his sweaty back, the collar slightly rumpled despite the brigade's efforts to keep him pristine. Maigret needs to go out in 4 minutes, he barked, mentally timing. That foie gras is way over. Do it again, Mark. Now, Mark, hands trembling, didn't argue. Even he was off balance. Plates came and went on gleaming trays. Orders rang out like war drums. A la minute. Passez-moi le beurre. Is the risotto ready? Catherine, unprompted, was already picking up dirty lids and quietly wiping spills from the floor before anyone could slip. She knew how to be useful without being seen. It was an art learned through pain. But tonight, something felt different in her chest. A strange warmth. A kind of knowing. Maybe even a premonition. And then, it happened. The main course of the night, a herb-crusted rack of lamb with smoked beet puree, was placed on the pass, ready to be whisked away by the maitre d', straight to Arthur Delamar's table. Mark picked it up. One step, two. A shout. A bump. An elbow misjudged. The plate flew. The sound of porcelain shattering against the floor rang out like glass breaking in slow motion. Shards everywhere, sauce spilling, the lamb sliding between spotless white kitchen boots. And then, silence. Julien froze. The maitre d' went pale. Mark's eyes widened as if he had just dropped his own future. The clock read 10:28. The critic expected his entree in under 5 minutes. Julien exploded. Merde, he yelled, the French accent thick with fury. Do you even realize what you've done? What this means? Mark scrambled to gather the broken pieces, his face flushed with panic. There's no time, chef. We can't redo it in time, someone muttered. Shut up. Of course we can. Someone get another cut. Someone. Julien was unraveling. His eyes searched the kitchen like they could will time to obey him. And then, a different voice emerged. Low. Steady. Like an unexpected chord struck in the middle of chaos. I can make a dish. Everyone turned. Catherine, standing at the center of the kitchen, hands still damp from her cleaning cloth. Her eyes didn't plead, but they didn't challenge, either. There was only certainty, and a flicker of fear, disguised as courage. Julien frowned. What? She didn't flinch. I said I can make a dish. In 4 minutes. Silence. Even the oven timers held their breath. It was as if the entire universe paused to await Julien's decision. Roberto stared at her from across the kitchen, surprised. Mark looked away, as if afraid of being linked to whatever this was. But Julien looked at her like he was truly seeing her for the first time. Do you know who you're cooking for? He asked, voice low. Do you know who is going to eat that plate? I do, she said. And I know how to cook. Please. Something flickered in Julien's eyes. Desperation, maybe. Or instinct. He stepped back. You've got 3 minutes. Catherine took half a breath, and then moved. And with that motion, something inside her sparked. Fast. Whole. Familiar. She darted to the pantry. Quick hands. Small sweet potatoes, red onions, a sprig of rosemary. 2 fresh fillets of fish. She returned to the counter with the focus of someone who had never been allowed to fail. Her hands trembled as she sliced the vegetables into paper-thin rounds. At first, but muscle memory took over. The motions returned. Her grandmother's silent lessons whispered back, like gentle ghosts watching over her. Fry it with whole garlic cloves, Catherine, skins on. It gives aroma, not bitterness. The sizzle of oil heating in the pan, the crackle of fish meeting hot metal, the rising aroma like a prayer in motion. There were no measurements, only memory. She formed the golden cakes over a smooth puree of sweet potato and nutmeg. Caramelized the onions with the rare patience of someone who knows seconds matter. A dash of lemon. 3 leaves of cilantro. No more. When she finished, sweat dotted her forehead, and silence surrounded her. All eyes were on her. Julian stepped closer, picked up the plate, said nothing, handed it to the maitre d'. Roberto looked at Catherine for a long second, then walked toward the dining room, carrying the dish like something sacred. Catherine didn't move. The scent of the fish still hung in the air, but now it mingled with something that had never existed in that kitchen before. Suspended respect. The La Riviere dining room had slipped into a tense calm. Arthur Delamar, seated at the central table, was not a man prone to theatrics. Every move was measured, his face unreadable. When the maitre d' placed the unexpected dish before him, one not listed on the menu, there was the faintest tightening of his brow. Subtle, like a comma where none was expected. The plate was simple, but elegant, impeccably arranged. The scent was different. He glanced briefly at the maitre d'. This wasn't scheduled, Monsieur Roberto. A small improvisation from Chef Julian, Mr. Delamar. We hope it pleases you. Roberto lied with the practiced ease of a man trained to do just that. Arthur said nothing. He picked up his fork and knife, cut into one of the golden cakes. The crisp crust gave way with the softest sound, but those nearby heard it. He brought it to his mouth, chewed, and stopped. The dining room, which had been filled with low conversation, seemed to lose all its air. The critic held his fork halfway to his lips, eyes fixed on some invisible point in front of him. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just stood there, frozen, as if that single taste had pulled him into another time and place. In the kitchen, just beyond the swinging wooden door, the tension was almost tangible. Julian paced back and forth, restless. The cooks exchanged uneasy glances. Mark nervously bit the tip of his disposable glove. Catherine stood motionless in the corner, observing everything. She still held the dish towel, her fingers damp. Roberto returned a few minutes later, signaling to Julian with a subtle nod. The chef took a deep breath and stepped into the dining room. Delamar was waiting, arms crossed. Chef Julian. His voice was low, but firm. This dish. Who created it? Julian hesitated. For just half a second. It was a team effort, quickly developed, given the circumstances. The critic raised an eyebrow. Not irritated. Just repeated, slower this time. I'd like to meet the person who made it. The dish. Not the excuse. Julian tried to smile, but the lie already tasted bitter. With all due respect, Mr. Delamar, perhaps we can discuss this later. No. Now. Please. Julian remained silent, then turned to look at the kitchen. He didn't say a word, but the door swung open seconds later, and Catherine walked in. It felt like the world took a half step back. Her cleaning uniform clashed with everything in the room. Worn sneakers, a faded apron, hair tied back plainly. And yet, there was something about her. Poise. Strength. She walked slowly, eyes on the floor ahead of her. But her head was held high, her shoulders firm. She knew everyone was watching. She knew what they were thinking. And still, she kept going. She stopped in front of Delamar's table. The critic studied her for a long moment, then spoke gently. You made this dish? Catherine nodded. A brief, subtle motion. What's your name? Catherine. Silence. Delamar set his silverware down with care, took a deep breath, then smiled. Not the formal smile of a critic, but something more personal, more human. My mother used to make something like this, he said, voice teetering between memory and reverence. Not with the same presentation, of course, but the flavor, the seasoning, the texture. It's like she's here now, sitting beside me. He paused. I never thought I'd feel this in a restaurant like this. Catherine didn't know what to say. She didn't need to. Delamar turned to Julian. Chef, with all due respect, the most genuine talent I've witnessed today did not come from your brigade. Julian said nothing. In the corner, Mark lowered his gaze. The waiters exchanged glances. Some guests whispered, surprised but captivated. The hierarchy had cracked. Not from scandal, but from truth. The next morning, Catherine arrived early, as always. But something was already different. The kitchen fell silent when she entered. Some looked at her with awkward respect. Others avoided her eyes. On the back wall, taped with masking tape, was the day's newspaper. Front and center, The Invisible Soul of La Riviere, by Arthur Delamare. Several lines marked in red pen. In a restaurant defined by pomp and protocol, it was an invisible cook who reminded me that food, above all, is love. If there's any justice in the culinary world, Catherine won't stay in the background for long. She read it in silence. Behind her, hurried footsteps. Fully booked through the end of the month, muttered a stunned waiter. TV reporter wants to come tonight. Ask about the mystery chef. Mark walked past her and, for a second, hesitated. Good morning, he said quietly, without sarcasm. Catherine didn't respond. But her silence now carried a different weight. A full one. In the back of the kitchen, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. And the scent of the fritters still hung in the air, like a beautiful scar. A memory no one could pretend didn't exist anymore. Julian's office had always been a hostile place. Papers stacked with surgical precision, cookbooks displayed like war trophies, a window overlooking the alley, as if the outside world didn't matter. But that morning, the light entered differently. Softer, as if something in the air had changed density since the night before. Catherine stood at the door, still wearing her cleaning uniform, but no longer defined by it. Come in, Catherine, Julian said, with a courtesy he had never before shown her. She stepped in slowly, hands gently clasped, eyes scanning the corners like someone entering a house she had always cleaned, but never lived in. Please sit, Julian insisted. She sat. The leather chair creaked under her light frame. He, on the other side of the desk, waited a few moments before speaking. He looked at her with a face still trying to grasp what it had failed to see for so long. He began, clearing his throat. I just want to understand. How someone, like you, he quickly corrected himself, someone without formal training, without a position here, can cook like that? Where did that come from? Catherine took her time before answering. Not because she didn't know, but because she didn't know where to begin. I grew up in a place where we didn't eat for flavor. We ate what we could afford, she finally said, staring down at her hands. But my grandmother, she could turn that into a celebration. Julian leaned back, fully attentive. She couldn't read, didn't have recipes, measured everything in the palm of her hand. But she had a gift. The smell told her everything she needed to know. She knew the meat was done by the sound it made in the pan. The rice, by the steam. She taught me like that. No rush. No pressure. Her eyes drifted to some distant memory. She used to say, if you cook in fear, the food will taste bitter. And I learned not to be afraid. At least, not in the kitchen. Outside of it, I've always been scared of everything. Julian didn't interrupt. I've been working since I was young, Catherine went on, her voice steady. One of my first jobs was taking care of an elderly lady with Alzheimer's. Donna Amalia. She'd forget her children's names. But when I made her porridge just the way she liked it, she would smile. Sometimes even hum songs from her childhood. It was like magic. That's when I started to understand. Food is memory you can taste. The silence between them thickened. And why didn't you ever try to become a chef? Enroll in some kind of course? Julian asked, genuinely puzzled. Catherine gave a small smile, like someone who's been asked that question many times. Because no one looks at a cleaning lady and thinks, there's a chef. And because, she hesitated, because I was afraid I'd look foolish. Like I thought too much of myself. And end up laughing at myself the way people laughed last night. Julian closed his eyes for a moment. Swallowed hard. I was one of them, he said, almost in a whisper. I'm sorry. She nodded softly, without bitterness. I never wanted to be seen. Not in the wrong way. But I also could never stop. She pulled an old phone from her pocket. Its screen cracked. I watch videos on the bus. Chefs. Techniques. I wake up at 5. Take 2 buses. Watch until the battery dies. And if I have time left, I write notes. I have a notebook. I hide it behind the flower shelf. No one's ever seen it. Julian placed his hands on the desk. I saw it. This morning. I opened it by accident, looking for labels. He took a breath. It's an extraordinary notebook. It's my school. My paper kitchen. They looked at each other for a moment. Not as boss and employee, but as something closer. And the first time you ever cooked here? He asked, curious. Catherine smiled. The smile of someone reliving a treasured secret. It was on a Sunday. No one else had shown up yet. I'd finished cleaning. The kitchen looked so beautiful, so still. It felt like it was calling me. I grabbed some leftovers. Potatoes, eggs, a bit of cheese. I made a tortilla. Nothing fancy. But the smell, when it rose up. I cried. Julian smiled too, but his eyes shimmered. I understand. He stood up and walked to the bookshelf. Picked up an envelope. Catherine, I want to make you an offer. I'll pay for your culinary education, and I want you to start immediately as my assistant. Officially. She didn't move. Why? Because you reminded me what it means to cook with soul. And that's dying. Everyone wants medals. Fame. You just want to make food that hugs people. That's rare. Irreplaceable. She blinked a few times, unsure whether to smile or cry. I accept, she said, her voice trembling. But can I keep cleaning for now? At least until someone else can do it right. I don't want to leave things dirty behind me. Julian laughed softly and nodded. This kitchen is yours now, Catherine. It knows it. And so do we. That morning, her cleaning uniform still hung on the hook in the back room. Beside it, carefully laid out, was something new. A crisp white chef's coat, with Catherine Smith embroidered neatly over the chest. She took a few seconds before putting it on. She ran her fingers over the fabric, touched the letters with the tip of her index finger, like someone carefully testing if something is real. Then she put it on slowly, fastened each button with deliberate care. The dry click of each snap felt like it was sealing not just the garment, but time itself, a time that unfolded right there, in front of her, with a new color, a new scent. When she looked at herself in the small mirror hanging beside the lockers, she didn't see a sudden transformation. There was no magic, no grand revolution, just a familiar face. And yet, somehow a new one. She walked toward the main kitchen with measured but steady steps. The doors opened naturally before her. And this time, no one pretended not to see her. Julian stood at the center, next to the mise en place station. When he saw her, he gave a small, genuine smile, nothing performative. Good morning, Chef Catherine. A few members of the team echoed the greeting. Others simply nodded without meeting her eyes. The sous chef, Mark, visibly uneasy, muttered something that sounded like a good morning through clenched teeth. But there was honesty in it, however faint. And that was enough. The kitchen kept moving, pans clanging, lids lifting, steam rising. But something in its rhythm had changed. Catherine moved through the space like someone returning to sacred ground. She felt the floor beneath her feet as if for the first time, even though she'd scrubbed it for years. She touched the counters with reverence. She saw the neatly arranged containers, the aligned silverware, not as symbols of exclusion anymore, but of belonging. She stopped in front of the cleaning cabinet, tucked in the most discreet corner of the service hallway. She opened the door. There, between the blue bucket and a box of rags, her notebook was still waiting. The same navy blue notebook, smudged with grease, its pages dog-eared. Inside, handwritten recipes, dish sketches, her grandmother's sayings, important dates, memories buried in scribbles. She picked it up, held it in her hands for a few moments. Then, without haste, she put it back where it belonged. But this time, not as someone hiding. As someone saying goodbye. She closed the door gently, with a soft thud that sounded like a period. Or maybe, like, I can move on now. She turned around, and before taking her first step toward the dining room, where the journalists were already waiting to hear her story, where customers would order Chef Catherine's dish, without knowing where she came from, she took a deep breath. And she listened, not out loud, but within, like an old whisper. Good food hugs you before it ever reaches your mouth, my girl. Her grandmother's voice. She smiled and walked on. We never really know how many stories live inside a person until the world decides to listen. Catherine was living proof that talent can't be judged by a uniform, and courage isn't measured by titles. That true dreams grow deep roots, even through the concrete of indifference. And that every time someone laughs at a dream, a dish is lost. But when someone dares to believe, even the kitchen learns to listen.